A stitch in time saves 9. It's so funny. When I was a kid, all the old wives' tales seemed like such a bunch of nonsense. But the older I get, their truth became so much more clear. I wish I had taken this one to heart sooner, as the longer I waited to get into public speaking, the more excuses I made to not get up here and give it a shot. My full name is Cristobal Ernesto Gonzalez, but that is a bit of a mouthful, so you guys can just call me Chris. I've lived in the Seattle area for most of my life, with the exception of 10 years in England, which I remember as being a bit of a magical Harry Potter experience. When I was 9 years old, my mom, my little sister, and I all moved in with my grandparents into an old pub on the outskirts of London, which they had run for over 30 years. As you entered the pub, the first person to always greet you would be my granddad, Ernie. He was quite a character. He loved his fast cars and whiskey, always looking sharp in freshly ironed shirts and tailored suits. And trying to look like my granddad, I would get dressed up in my shirt and tie as a little 9-year-old kid and run downstairs and earn some pocket money by wiping down tables and doing chores. I got the nickname of Little Ernie as he would sit me on the bar counter and introduce his American grandson to all of his friends and customers. He still had that twinkle in his eye, but his health was failing and his knees were aching. He even made it into the newspaper for refusing to serve half pints of lager, as he felt it wasn't worth getting up off his chair for. My mom still lives in London, and I try and get back every couple of years or so. At the end of last year, we took off on what I would consider an epic 4-week, 3,500-mile road trip, and from London to southern Italy. I got to see some amazing historical sites with one of my favorite traveling companions, my mom. I got to drink some Belgian beer brewed by monks in a monastery. Got to drive my mom's new BMW on the Autobahn. On the way to Oktoberfest, the largest beer festival in the world. Had a fantastic tuna sandwich on the main square of Venice. Strolled through the Roman Colosseum and the ruins of Pompeii. And last but not least, got to take Sunday Mass at the Vatican. My dad's recently retired from a 33-year career with the Kitsap Library and moved back home to where we were both born in Texas. As English was his second language, he was always trying to improve on his communication skills. Then he found Toastmasters, which took him to a whole new level of speaker. Over the years, he's taken part in many work and social events. As far back as I can remember, he's been lifting weights, jogging, reading, and writing. And I guess the apple hasn't fallen too far from the tree. At 5 or 6, he had me doing curls. In my teens, he had me jogging. And now here I am giving my first speech. He did drag me to Toastmasters about 10 years ago, but I can't lie, I wasn't too interested in adventuring that far from my comfort zone, although I wish I had now. Technically, I just have one little sister with a very large character. She lives in Amsterdam and works for Greenpeace. Her partner works for the United Nations, and in case you hadn't guessed, they're both very actively interested in environmental and human rights issues. Even though I may be a bit behind the curve on a lot of the topics, I am very proud to consider both of these girls my sisters, sorry. As far as work goes, I've been involved in building roads and bridges for the last 10 years. 2 years ago, I transferred from the laborers' union to the carpenters' union and got hired onto the 520 floating bridge, which, FYI, is the longest floating bridge in the world. So the next time you drive across the 520, take a close look at all of the columns. There's around 800 of them, and they vary from as tall as 60 feet to as short as 10. But the one thing they all have in common is I was involved in building most of them. I may have implied I'm up here following my dad's footsteps, but that's not exactly the case. Work would regularly have large meetings numbering into the hundreds. Just the thought of the microphone heading in my direction was enough to give me a panic attack. Judging by most of the performances given, it seemed like it was a sink or swim moment. And if that was to be the case, I was shooting for gold. Step aside, Michael Phelps. At one of these meetings, a coworker really surprised me, giving an especially confident, articulate speech. I complimented him and asked if he had any previous public speaking experience. He just looked at me and chuckled and said, "Hell no, kid, that's 20 years in Alcoholics Anonymous." So the question bouncing around my mind was clear: AA or Toastmasters? And after some careful thought and consideration, the answer was obvious. Unfortunately, I couldn't find an AA meeting that worked for me. And like my granddad, I do love a glass of whiskey. Mr. Toastmaster?
Yay!